sometimes we can seek realization so deeply that we kind of focus on what truth is instead of focusing on how truth moves. And in the work I like to offer, the reason I call it heart-centered consciousness is because rather than get tripped up on what truth knows, I like to have us explore how truth moves. And when truth moves alive within us, it moves as the way of love, compassion, and unity.
In a time of divisiveness, where it often seems like it's very hard to get people on opposite sides of an issue to really stop, listen, and take each other's perspective, Matt Kahn has come out with a new book, All for Love, The Transformative Power of Holding Space. What's beautiful is that he teaches holding space for our own experiences and the experiences of each other as an art form we can learn how to master, an art form that makes us everyday healers, both for ourselves and in our relationship with others. Come listen to Matt Kahn, All for Love, at Sounds True One. Matt, as we join together here, you and me and all of our listeners, I want to explore heart-centered consciousness in our time. And to do that, I wonder right here at the beginning of our conversation, can you help attune us in some way so we're actually listening right here with our hearts open and attuned to the conversation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think when we really dive into heart-centered consciousness, consciousness always being synonymous with the truth of reality. And I think sometimes that when we look at how the mind likes to explore, compare, and really arrive at a realization, sometimes we can seek realization so deeply that we kind of focus on what truth is instead of focusing on how truth moves. And in the work I like to offer, the reason I call it heart-centered consciousness is because rather than get tripped up on what truth knows, I like to have us explore how truth moves. And when truth moves alive within us, it moves as the way of love, compassion, and unity. And so as we take this journey of ever-expanding consciousness, because love is the highest vibration and love is the cornerstone of the deepest realization, rather than getting tripped up on what is or isn't the truth, it's really, really important that we take this time together to viscerally explore how the truth of love moves within us when we hold space and allow it to open and move through us from our hearts to another.
Mm-hmm. Now, your new book, All for Love. First of all, what a beautiful phrase. All for love. Yes, indeed. It's about this power of holding space.
Yes.
And I know you've been on quite a journey over the
Yes.
past 3.5 or so years. This book came out of this time of your life. Tell us a little bit about that, the journey you've personally been on, and how All for Love, the book, emerged.
Well, thank you so much for asking. It's been quite a 3.5-year journey for me. I remember 3.5 years ago or so, I was exhausted, was constantly on the road and traveling and doing events. And I had this feeling that I had to get taken off the road to really heal from exhaustion. And as I was healing from exhaustion, which turned out to be an early case of COVID, I was then processing the death of my parents, who had died about a year between each other. And although I was very excited for my parents to be together in heaven, it gave me a chance to finally kind of focus on some of the things that had fallen by the wayside with how busy I was traveling. So I had an early case of COVID, processing the death of my parents. And I also went through the unraveling of a relationship that for me was like the fantasy I had when I was 12 years old. Since I was 12 years old, I was always thinking, who's my wife going to be? And I thought I had met my wife and we were engaged to be married. And it turns out we're still incredible friends. But the ending of that relationship, compounding with the processing of the death of my parents and this early case of COVID, all together, just for me, became this radical opportunity of transformation. And I allowed myself to go so deep into my healing journey, perhaps deeper than I've ever gone before. And out of this depth I touched within the core of my being that actually helped me find the greatest power I've ever known. That was the space through which All for Love was written.
And I've heard you describe, when you're talking about the book All for Love, that you actually sobbed, audibly sobbed
Yes.
quite a bit through the writing. What was going on for you during the sobbing phases as they happened?
For many years of my life, I've gone through awakening experiences, and a lot of the memories of my life seem to have disappeared. And I experience myself more as a expression of consciousness than as a person. And as I went through processing the death of my parents and the loss of the relationship and healed from an early case of COVID, it really became the backdrop for my integrated ego to integrate back into my body. And as I came back into my body through this deeply healing journey, it was one of the first times in my life, and so unexpectedly, that I felt real. I felt tangible. I felt real. A lot of memories of my life that I'd forgotten came flooding back. And it was from the flooding of these memories and being able to piece together my life as I've never done before. I used it as a backdrop to write this book so that not only was this an opportunity for me to know myself deeper, but I wanted to give my audience a chance to know the person that I am and the person that's taken my journey and to know the depths of what has made me who I am. And it was just so perfect how these stories that as I remembered them, as I was writing them, I was reliving them image by image, moment by moment, and literally sat in front of my computer and sobbed my eyes out in one of the most cathartic moments of my life. And as I was writing and sobbing while writing this book, I had a feeling sense that everyone that reads this book is going to go through the exact same journey to really process our past, integrate our healing journey, and really get to a point that we can step forward as love in action and not just be beings that think about love, but act from a different reactive place.
Being with the book All for Love, it's almost like I got to know three different aspects of you, and I want to bring them forward and maybe have you share a story about each, if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
So one part of Matt that I got to know was the person who grew up in, it sounded like a pretty dysfunctional in some ways family,
Yeah.
and one in which you went through quite a lot of hardship. So there was like Matt Kahn, the person who suffered as a young child in a difficult relationship
Yeah.
with your parents. Then there was Matt Kahn, the super empathic human who felt so much of what was going on with everybody else around him. And then the third Matt Kahn that I met, and this is just my own reading, my own experience, was kind of like the divine, light infused, talking to archangels and being visited by messengers, the divine child Matt Kahn. So I met all three, and I wonder just a little bit if now you could introduce in your own words, from your own experience, how you see these three parts, and maybe if there's another part you want to introduce. And the reason I'm bringing this forward is that you help us see ourselves as human beings who are also divine beings at the same time, and I think that's so useful.
Well, thank you. And it was one of the first times I've shared so many different aspects of myself because it was during a time where I got more in tune with and connection with all these different aspects. The me that survived so much emotional turmoil with my family, as much as I could look back and I can say, oh, that was difficult. I could say that difficult, tumultuous time was the greatest training ground for the work I did once I reached, as you would say, the Matt Kahn, the light being one. And really, it was that difficult stage of emotional intensity and volatility that allowed that empathic Matt Kahn to really, well, first of all, be overwhelmed at his empathic abilities, but at the same time, it gave me a chance to be so absorbed in it that I started to learn what my abilities were and how they function. So I look at the first two stages of Matt and I said, if it wasn't for the empathic me, I never would have looked deep enough into myself to find what I'm here to give the world. And if it wasn't for the volatility of my family, as much as I can look back and see how difficult that was for me, it wouldn't have created the backdrop of study and analysis that helped me become who I am. So I look back at these times and all the stories that I tell, and I'm telling some very deep stories. I'm telling some very emotionally stirring stories. But as I'm telling the stories, even when I'm recalling the deepest pain, I'm really recalling them from a place of gratitude because I look back at my life and I really do see how everything was a divine setup for who I came to be and all the lives that I'm so blessed I have the chance to touch.
Now, what would you say to that person who says, I hear the words, I
Yeah.
could look at my own past trauma as a divine setup, but
Yeah.
I don't really think that's true. I don't experience it that way. What would you say to someone who has that response?
I would say it's a normal response given the way we've been conditioned to see the world, that we tend to look at things of value as the things that feel the best in our hearts, and the things that don't feel good to our hearts, we usually give a judgment of less value. And what I can say as a benefit, even though I was in a family, I wasn't raised in an abusive family, I was raised in an emotionally volatile family. And so I was exposed to a level of emotional volatility that I couldn't escape or get away from. When my parents wanted to talk to me or, felt more like an interrogation, I had no option but to face them until they were satisfied with the interaction. And so for me, not having a way to escape the emotional volatility forced me to find value in the things that didn't feel very comfortable. And I think for all of us, maybe we need time away from our experiences, and maybe only in retrospect can we see this. But I think if we really dive into the complexities of our deepest emotional pain, and when we're willing to go beyond judgment and step out from behind hiding in righteousness, when we're able to actually look beyond the sensation of pain or beyond the sensation or label of wrongdoing, we can actually find that there is a meaningful amount of growth and expansion that occurs even in the harshest climate of circumstances and even in the deepest insurmountable pain. So I think for me, I'm just speaking from a place where even though it was painful and uncomfortable, it didn't limit the value of what it was there to teach me and what it helped bring to life within me. And that's my hope really for every reader of this book, is that we take our lives and despite the pain, we allow the value of how it's here to make us even better to bring that to life.
All for Love is about the transformational power of holding space. And
Yes.
of course, when it comes to holding space, we can hold space for each other, but I want to start with focusing on what it means to hold space for ourselves. So
Yes.
here we are, and we're beginning our conversation by talking about holding space for the pain of our past. And it could be anything difficult that we might be going through. Help our listeners understand how we hold space for ourselves when we're suffering.
It's a great question. I think because we look into form, and most of form is made up from space or made up of space. So we think of the phrase holding space as really another way of pointing to holding ourselves. And so if we think about it emotionally, if we think about it even physically, how would we like to be held to feel safe while feeling the most precarious and uncertain of emotions? And so often the way we'd want people to hold us during those moments is ways we learn to hold ourselves. So again, as we learn to hold ourselves, maybe it's a hand on the heart. So we feel our constant attentive companionship. It might be using words to let us know, I'm here with you. We've got this. I always want to hear what you have to say. Really, what the holding space process does is it teaches us how to fully be there for ourselves in a way where we can actually feel the power of our own companionship and not just feel like our own self love is some consolation prize. And so a lot of people I've worked with, they start to love themselves, but it feels like a consolation prize compared to what they want from other people. And the more we've dived deeply into holding ourselves and holding space, we actually start to build such an extraordinary relationship of love with our own hearts. We start to reconnect the inner parent with the inner child. And we start to feel so whole in ourselves that from that point forward, we can now interact with other people differently because we're speaking from our wholeness, not trying to find our wholeness in the pockets of other people's approval.